everyone. I'm glad you could join us again. This week, we are doing a special review of a brand new video interview by Dr. Mark Cronshaw and Ari Whitten. They go into depth on the whole issue of heating. Now, we've had this over and over come up about some say, well, it's rather warm. Maybe it's not doing the right thing. I think in this podcast, I think you'll be able to learn a little more about the light and the heating and how it actually can be beneficial. So we're going to get that started in a minute. So also, we will be having an online giveaway as well. And that will be for the Super Palm. That has the 660 nanometer wavelength and the 1050. And that is one where if you share this with your friends, a link, and they decide to sign up, then you get so many points, and the person with the most points will win. And we will be giving that information out there as to who won on that very shortly. Okay, so with all that, we're going to get started.
15 years back, I realized that light could make a huge difference on the body. I ended up designing this very powerful light using LED technology. With this amount of very high power density, it can reach through the tissues and travel right to the joints. But the key is that the power density and the area is extremely important to deliver that light into that. The mitochondria receives that light and converts that energy into the cell. So it's like giving the cell super high octane fuel, and they run like a jet, and they're able to do all the things for repair in that. What are the products we have? Well, we have a small device, which is actually large when it comes to light therapy. You have a fairly large area of light and a high power density that can be used for different parts of the body, like your finger, shoulder, back, neck, knees, ankle, anywhere on the body. And then we have what's called the mini canopy, which is about a foot square in size. And then we have our full-size canopy, which is basically 6 of the mini canopies. And then we have another device, which is the helmet, and that device can help for mental issues, for brain injuries, for concussions, for PTSD, TBI, all of those kinds of things. And there's new research out there that shows it could be helpful for not only strokes, but dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, and just different brain issues. Our plans are to move this technology into every area of the world where there's pain and inflammation, which is basically everywhere, and to expand that so people understand all the applications where this technology can be used to help them in their health in the body as a wellness device. People are looking for how they can treat themselves without drugs.
Okay, so now we're going to be starting that video in just a minute, and this will be by Dr. Mark Cronshaw and Ari Whitten. And Dr. Mark Cronshaw is a researcher, and he actually has a dental clinic in England, and he has learned about PBM a long time ago, and he has done an extensive amount of research. And back about last March, almost a full year ago, I got a chance to meet him in New Orleans. And at that point in time, he believed that only lasers could penetrate the body into deeper tissues. And I talked to him about that, and I showed he had 2 friends with him. Both of them had an issue where they had pain. One had pain in their calf muscle. The other one had pain in the back. And at this dental event, I presented the light to both of them. I had the mini canopy with me, and I also had a palm light. So the one fellow was treating his calf with his palm, and with my palm, I should say. And the other fellow was treating his back with my mini canopy. And both of them, after about a 15-minute treatment, both of them were had significantly less pain. And I think that was the start for Dr. Mark Cronshaw to realize that, hey, there must be something with these LEDs. And he basically was like, this doesn't quite make sense. You shouldn't be able to make LEDs. LEDs shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have gotten rid of the pain the way he saw that happen. So it was at that point that I got a chance to meet him again last August, and that was at the PBM conference in England. And in England, I got a chance to see him, and he had presented half a dozen LED devices, and they really were inferior LED devices. But he says these things, they're really not too good. They give you this and they give you that, but they're really pretty small. And and I said, look, do you want to try a real device, LED device? So I gave him one of these, and I said, would you give me a fair review on this? He says, absolutely, I'll share it with you. And so he took it back with him. Wasn't very long that he decided he wanted to buy one because there was somebody else who really needed one. And he told me at that point, him and his wife did not want to give up on their palm unit because they were using it for themselves and they loved it. And he did some analysis on it and was very surprised. Since then, we've worked together well. And that's why Ari got a chance to interview Mark Cronshaw, because I connected the two together. I called them and called both of them, and I said, look, I think you both need to talk to each other, and Ari, you need to do this interview. So he did, and he was very pleased, and that's how that went. So anyways, I think you're going to find this interesting. I'm going to stop it from time to time to give my comments along the way. So here we go.
As for the red to near infrared, which is where most people end up looking when they're thinking about buying a therapeutic PBM device, although there are these other multi-wavelength devices which have got blue included in them. Well, what sort of safe limits can you look at? And if you then think, well, why is there a safe limit? It all revolves around the effects in terms of temperature on the tissue rather than anything else. And so for the red to near infrared, what you don't want to do is to have an irradiance which is high enough to start to cause heating over and above the potential of the tissues to manage, to the extent where you start to see signs of tissue damage. All right.
So this would be a point where that we're talking of a temperature of usually 43 degrees Celsius or above. And really, that's not happening very much with LEDs unless you stop the airflow and you did a number of things. And 43 degrees, 45 degrees is really where you start causing damage. And at 43 degrees, actually, this is the temperature where you start saying, ouch, that's hot. I don't want that. So you take the light away from yourself at that point. So, but that's what he's talking about as far as this temperature that you don't want to exceed 43 degrees Celsius. And so we'll continue.
So where does that rest? Well, if you're talking about an LED, you're in pretty safe ground because it's not such an intense light source as a laser, and it'll take you substantially longer at a higher radiance to start to get that kind of thermal rise to the danger territory. And the danger territory we're looking at here is sustained elevation of temperature above around about 45 degrees centigrade. Now that over a long period of time, eventually you'll start to see some damage, which will manifest itself as some damage to proteins and fatty acid chains. And you could, if you really, really worked at it, it's a little bit like we were talking about earlier about my Aga, this cast iron oven, where you've just got that nice simmering oven, you put the food in there, and it's maybe, I don't know, something like 30, 35 degrees centigrade, if that, it feels nice and warm, but it's not hot. You leave it there all day, and that accumulated energy progressively will then start to degrade protein to the extent that that nice lamb shank is just falling off the bone. And so, the issue then is the rate at which you're delivering it. Now, if the rate at which you're delivering it is relatively low, then you're very unlikely to inadvertently damage tissues. So what is too high? Well, assuming you're dealing with red to near infrared wavelengths, you've got quite a lot of leeway when it comes to LEDs, because you can start to go up to anything up to maybe a couple of hundred milliwatts before you start to get a rapid thermal rise. And now, if you're standing underneath a red or near infrared panel, which has got a very high irradiance, you're going to feel heat, and you'll feel heat when it reaches 43 degrees centigrade. Because you've got some sensors present, which are called TRPVs, and there's one TRPV1, which is an ion gate which opens when it reaches 43 degrees centigrade. It's both temperature as well as light sensitive. And when that gate opens, you go, oh, that's unpleasant, that's hot, I'm moving, And so when I'm doing my therapeutic PBM laser treatment with more intensive treatments for my patients, and my patient says, this is getting really quite warm. I know, I'm just getting to that threshold, and that's a safe threshold, because above that level, this is where if I was to keep doing it, they're not going to just sit there and let me overheat them. Macabrely, patients don't appreciate being barbecued. It just doesn't happen. People pull away and say it's too hot. And so I think the issue to do with irradiance with LEDs, there's some flexibility there. Generally, we like to administer a dose so that it's gradual and it's cumulative rather than shocking the cells, particularly if it's a subsurface target. So if you've got a superficial condition, then because you have these superficial sensors, you're not going to cause some damage to the underlying tissues, because they will fire long before you get to a point where you're in the danger zone. If you're dealing with deeper tissues, because of the difficulty to do with delivering the dose, because it takes a lot longer to start to deliver the photons to depth, then there is an ascending danger that you could end up overheating the overlying tissues. But then again, there is this natural protective system present, which will prevent you from damaging yourself. So I think when people start making pronouncements that now you shouldn't go above 50 milliwatts, I think this is, in my opinion, a little bit excessive, to say the least. A little bit like, your kid's first bike, they have stabilizers on them, and you can go that way if you like, but it's not something which is written in stone as an absolute, far from it, because you can, if you to look at the literature, the scientific literature on this, you'll find that, for instance, the Multinational Association for Cancer Care, International Society of Oral Oncology, who have an interest in phototherapies for treating cancer patients, they recommend not going above around about 150 milliwatts per square centimeter.
Yeah, just to give you an idea on that, that's particular study, but later on they're talking about even as high as 500 milliwatts. All depends on the wavelength. So in the red near infrared band, red is going to be more heating or more topical heating than near infrared, but they're talking on upwards of several hundred milliwatts of power. Our devices are in the red are around 150 milliwatts optical power. So we're well within the range of safety as we go forward. So here we go.
That's their international statement. Whereas,
That's with LED devices.
and well, actually, that's for a laser, you know. And so when it comes to other authorities, people like Mike Hamblin, he did a paper with Rand Zane, who's a former student of mine, and Wayne Selting, who's a former mentor of mine. I know these people. They recommended for certain wavelengths not going above 750 milliwatts per square centimeter, and it was wavelength dependent, you know.
Yeah, this was, if you don't mind me interjecting, I'm looking at this paper right now that you're referring to. It's called Review of Light Parameters and Biomodulation Efficacy, Dive to Complexity. And so they're reviewing these parameters, and they say, this is a quote from this paper talking about the subject. They say, for instance, there exists a lower threshold, perhaps 0.5 milliwatts per centimeter squared, below which the illumination time could be infinite and would be no different from daylight. Similarly, the upper threshold is fixed by the possible photothermal effect, that's the heating of the tissues, if the power density is too large. The irradiance values that produce unacceptable heating of the tissue are governed by the wavelength and are approximately 750 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 800 to 900 nanometers, that's the near infrared, and 300 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 600 to 700 nanometers, and as low as 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 400 to 500 nanometers. That's the blue wavelengths of the spectrum. So, and actually subsequently in conversation with Dr. Hamblin, he revised down the near infrared safe parameters from about 750, as it states in this paper. He said he thinks it's more around 500 milliwatts per centimeter squared.
Absolutely, I would agree with that, and I do disagree that 0.5 of a milliwatt would take an infinite amount of time. There's actually a paper out there where somebody used some fiber optic impregnated fabric with a really low radiance. I think it's 0.2 of a milliwatt over about 5.5 to 6 hours, and they were still able to biostimulate some tissue culture cells, you know. So really low dose radiation can work. It just takes hours, and particularly if it's a subsurface target, it's just not rational or reasonable, and maybe you just won't get there. And so I think the pragmatic aspect to this is, do you have to be bound to only go for something which is a low radiance? Well, for red to near infrared, you know, I think if you're looking at, as a consumer, looking at a source which in combination with all the different sources of light that are present in that device, because often you get multiple wavelengths present, you know, a mixture of red and near infrared, of no more than about 500 milliwatts per square centimeter, you're safe, you know, and because it's not going to be so fast and so hot that you're going to cause yourself a burn or a problem. And you'll know when it gets too warm, because your body will tell you, because it gets about 43 degrees centigrade, and you will switch it off or leave, you know.
Yeah, so this comes back to what I was saying earlier, is that when we're talking of red wavelength, you can see where they're talking 200 milliwatts or 300 milliwatts or more is still fine. But one thing very, very important that he mentioned is the word, he said it very quickly, and that's subsurface. So really what you're trying to do is get in, you're going to have to, if you want to get deep into the target and you want to do it in a reasonable amount of time, you're going to have a lot more radiance on the surface. So the 150 milliwatts, 200 milliwatts, which will cause some warming of the surface temperature, as long as we're not doing something so hot that we're starting to burn the surface. But that will give you levels that will be much better for deeper in. And the other thing that they'll talk about is spot size. And remember, a lot has been done with lasers. So laser is a small spot size, and they really don't talk about it quite as clearly as I'd like it. where the spot size is really a spot that's like large, like 3 inches diameter is a large spot size. But most of these LED devices out there will have a lens in front of them where they have these little tiny spots of high intensity. And that really doesn't help you with penetration depth. You need that very, very even illumination over the whole surface at, let's say, 100 milliwatts or 150 milliwatts, not little points of light at 150 milliwatts. That's not going to do it to get depth. You need that whole surface very, very evenly illuminated at that 100 or 150 milliwatts to really get extra depth. And then you're going to have to add time to it. So we'll continue.
And so the other aspects of this, I guess, is this concept of area. Now, when you're delivering dose, the bigger the area that you on the surface that you deliver it to, the more effect you'll have on deeper subsurface targets, which is interesting. I did a paper on this where I was actually looking at lasers, but I think this applies to LEDs as well. And this is where I think Dr. Hamblin's ideas of total dose start to come in. Because in order to start to treat appreciable volumes of tissue, you've got to stick enough energy in there to be able to produce the effect that you're seeking, which is, I think, a very brief approximation of where we are with that. So hopefully that's helped you with that rather complex discussion.
Yes. Okay. So I want to just clarify a couple more points here. Mm-hmm. Well, let me do this layer first. There are some people who argue that photobiomodulation is, by definition, non-thermal. So that basically meaning that if we're delivering, let's say wavelengths in the red and near for part of the spectrum, and there is, I guess, maybe by this definition, any heating of the tissues, it really you don't find a specific temperature associated with this argument. The idea is that it should be non-thermal, which presumably means no heating of the tissues. So by this line of argumentation, anytime you're applying photobiomodulation with using parameters that are causing, let's say, some degree of heating, let's say a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 degree rise in the tissue temperatures, therefore it means it's not photobiomodulation, not true photobiomodulation because it causes a thermal effect. What do you think of this line of argumentation?
Well, I mean, it's very pure thinking in the sense that trying to splice what photobiomodulation is into a certain pathway, which is related to a photochemical process, as opposed to the more intricate aspects of electromagnetic irradiation on biological tissues. Because in any chemical reaction, you get heat as a byproduct. You can't have a chemical reaction without there being some spin-off in terms of heat. The 100% pure transfer of photonic energy into a photochemical one just doesn't happen. You always get heat, and heat is very strictly regulated inside the cell. So when they're talking about heat, they're talking about measurable heat in terms of tangible temperature increases, which then may be beyond the cell and into the tissues. And this is where, indeed, there is a difference between photobiomodulation and its effects and heat. But the two things inevitably go together. You always get some heat, even with a 50 milliwatt source. If you were to get an ultra-sensitive, temperature-sensitive fluorescent probe, which is the sort of stuff they're using in laboratories now, where they've got some amazing microscopy and they can see the effect of little hotspots inside of the cell. Then they can see that there are temperature gradients inside the cell, and actually the mitochondria are much hotter than the rest of the cell. And this is where, in terms of evolution, it's one of the principal roles of mitochondria is not just to push out this really valuable energy currency, ATP, it's also to generate heat. There's even one author who suggests that mitochondria look like radiators, you know, because they have these crystal plates like this. And they look just like radiators, and that's what they
Yeah.
do. They're a source of endothermal heat, and that's a byproduct of the chemical reactions associated with what we call oxidative phosphorylation, which is this fantastic process where sugars are broken down into the constituent energies in a controlled fashion, and that energy is then used to fashion biological, useful little packets of energy, which the cell can then metabolize, like ATP. So it's biologically a nonsense to say that in photobiomodulation there is no heat. It's impossible, you know, and either that or they belong on a different physical planet to the rest of us. You know, it's just not possible. I think where this argument gets conflated, if you'll forgive the phrase, is when people start talking about the potential harmful effects of heat, where people say, well, if you heat up the cell beyond a couple of degrees centigrade, then you're no longer seeing the stimulatory effects that you see in terms of metabolism.
Okay, so coming back to here again about the heat that's in the area at the target. And if you are trying to target something deeper, you definitely don't mind on the surface having the higher temperature, as long as as he says, you don't have the ouch moment that it's feeling too hot. And if that ever happens with any type of PBM, then just pull it back a little bit. That'll reduce your radiance. So you'll or move the light around the area. So we're just going to skip along in about 5 minutes because we want to carry on with some really good stuff that's happening here. So, okay. Okay, go for it.
Where they heat up muscles, where they have fasciculation. It's a trigger point where you have that painful spot which is just not resolving, and the intention is slightly overheat it, so then that triggers off remodeling. Similarly, dermatologists, when they're doing facial aesthetics, they can do some treatments where they traumatize the surface of the tissue in order to trigger off an inflammatory response, in order to get remodeling of the tissues, to get rid of those acne points, and to help give you nice collagen-rich, more youthful tissues. So,
what temperatures roughly do you think would correspond to cause that sort of low damage that would induce remodeling?
well, I mean, the sort of equipment they're using to do fractional dermatology, they're actually using quite high temperatures, but they have a device which it punches almost like tiny needle points, like a pinprick area of damage. And that then triggers off remodeling, and there it'll be getting really hot. It may be as high as 100 degrees C plus, but only for a very short duration of time. So it's very superficial damage. It's something which has got very little collateral damage, and according to the wavelength in which they're using it, it's just enough just to get into the dermis, but without starting to cook and damage deeper structures of collateral tissues. And the parameters associated with this have been very carefully worked out, both scientifically, mathematically, as well as clinically by the dermatology communities. So when you start to translate that pool of knowledge into PBM, you realize that, you know, the sort of kit that we're using, the sort of apparatus that we're using, really doesn't represent what you might refer to as a clear and present danger.
Let me present a couple views to you, and this will speak to what you've already touched on here, but I just want to make sure we kind of speak to this directly. Is the connection coming through okay at this point?
Brilliant.
Okay. So when I had Dr. Praveen Irani on my podcast, he he seemed to mostly be arguing from the perspective that PBM should be non-thermal or mostly non-thermal. I think that was sort of more of the camp that he was coming from. I think his exact words were something to the effect of, I think tissue heating has no place in PBM, or something along those lines. And he presented, when we dug into it further, he presented some research from his laboratory. I know you're familiar with this study, where they I think it was a mouse study or a rat study, where they showed that when the skin temperature got above 42 degrees Celsius, that it started to deactivate ROS, reactive oxygen species scavengers, and that this was indicative of harm starting to occur at 42 degrees Celsius. And then above 45 degrees Celsius, this is really when sort of, I think, cellular damage starts to occur. Now, so that was sort of Dr. Irani's general take, is that, he's very concerned about tissue heating, and then these, after some back and forth of clarifying whether PBM should be entirely non-thermal and whether heating of the skin temperature below 42 degrees Celsius is a problem. We sort of had a back and forth there. Eventually, he clarified that he feels above 42 degrees Celsius is problematic. But overall, again, seems quite concerned about tissue heating. Now, when I spoke to Dr. Hamblin about this same issue, he had quite a different perspective. His perspective was essentially almost like he was minimizing the importance of tissue heating. Number one, he said, at the idea that PBM should be non-thermal, he said that's rubbish. Those were his exact words. And that that part of the mechanism of PBM is actually some degree of heating. Now, when I asked him about, irradiances that would lead to overheating of the tissue, and at what degree is what temperature would be considered problematic overheating, he seemed to mostly not be all that concerned with it, because his position was basically, we've got sensors to detect when our tissues are overheating. And so we're not just going to sit there and allow ourselves to be burned. Once we feel uncomfortably or painfully hot, we're going to move that device, or we're going to stop the treatment. And so he almost felt like this is not even really an issue, because nobody's just going to sit there and harm themselves. So what's your take of sort of those two perspectives?
Well, of course, I've looked at the science and the study. I'm well acquainted with the study that Praveen did with Imran Khan and the Harvard group that did the study. And in short, what they did was they took these poor little mice, and they shaved off the fur, and they took a laser. And I think it was a near-infrared 810 nanometer laser, so not an LED, but a laser. And they set it up at a distance from that poor little mouse's leg. And they set the output power of the laser to 3.2 watts to an area of 2 centimeters in diameter, right? And so that's the equivalent of an area of 3.142, which is basically round about 1 watt per square centimeter. Okay, and that was their declared irradiance in that paper. The problem with that is that laser energy is inherently Gaussian, right? So when you emit the energy from a laser, the energy doesn't come out flat like that. It's more like a traffic cone with a peak in the middle. And just short of 70% of the energy is in the mid-third of the beam. So the periphery of the beam doesn't get so much energy, but most of the energy is in the center. And that basically means that that central zone, which is something which has got an area of around about 3 square centimeters, so around about that middle core of 1 centimeter squared, isn't getting 1 watt, it's actually getting 2 watts per square centimeter, okay? Which is really quite a lot of energy, especially from a laser. And it doesn't stop there, because in the middle of that 1 centimeter area, it carries on peaking, as I say, it's like a traffic cone. It comes to a peak, a spike in the middle of the beam. And there you're getting up to 4 watts per square centimeter to an area of around about 0.3 square centimeters. And if you look at the histology of that study, you can see that there's some localized photothermal induced damage. And that is a photothermal effect. All right. And so I contacted Praveen Irani, who's a scientist I've got great time for. I very much admire his work, because there are many aspects of that study which are terrific. I really like the work he did looking at the deactivation of the reactive oxygen species, and above 42 degrees centigrade, there's catalyase and the glutathione reductase, and the potential toxic effects that could have. He did some very elegant tissue culture studies to confirm that indeed reactive oxygen species were an important element associated with the tissue damage that he said he was seeing, in that if he basically neutralized those ROS, then he saw less tissue damage. And he used that to argue that this was primarily an ROS-induced effect rather than a photothermal effect. However, in his tissue culture studies, he did exactly the same using a Gaussian source. And so I'm sorry, but I just don't buy in. I'm with Mike Hamblin, and I use high energy, large spot size laser devices, not LEDs, way beyond the capacity of the sort of stuff that you can buy on Amazon or eBay or whatever. And I don't go around burning patients. I've never had a patient with a burn, yet the sort of level of energy that I'm using is at times really quite high. I might be putting 6.5 watts into something which has got a 12.5 square centimeter area. And all I'm doing there is I'm optically scanning to spread the beam in order to avoid overheating the energy in the middle of the beam, and which is all you need to do. So in short, I think that there are strengths in Praveen's study which are really good, to do with the threshold beyond which certain key protective enzymes are deactivated. But this association with it being an ROS effect, I think it was a photothermal effect, not an ROS effect. I think it's because he used a laser. I think because the parametry in which he employed, then there was a lot of energy in the middle of the beam. And if he was to repeat that, which maybe one day somebody will do, with a different setup where it wasn't a Gaussian beam, and where they really were delivering 1 watt per square centimeter, I think you finally got a different effect. And anyway, we wouldn't use 1 watt per square centimeter in PBM. The maximum threshold we would use probably would be about 500 milliwatts per square centimeter, because we recognize that above that, certainly above 750 milliwatts per square centimeter, then there is an ascending risk of photothermal damage. So I'm with Mike Hamblin, and so sorry, Praveen, but and we traded a couple of emails on this, and he says, well, we've done follow-up studies, and I very much respect the quality of his scientific work, but I did a paper myself all about photothermal aspects of photobiomodulation therapies, and this is the sort of area where scientists differ. I don't say Praveen's wrong. I don't think he would say that he's right and I'm wrong. I think we could probably settle this sort of difference with some further tests and discussions. And all this is telling me is that maybe we need to do some further studies, before coming to a final position.
Mm-hmm. So I suspect you'll have some resistance to this question, but in the interest of, speaking to a general audience who, is using LED devices at home, whether we're using LED panels or devices, more like neoprene pad style devices or things like this. This is a SunPowerLED Palm device from Tom Kerber, who I know. And I have, several other devices over here, LED devices. Mm-hmm. But, speaking, I think, practically, sort of taking everything that you've explained at this very high level of, more scientific rigor that would be acceptable in an academic circle. Practically speaking, what do you think are what should be the level of concern that people have over the irradiance of LED-based devices and the degree to which there might be some warming or heating of the tissues?
Well, I think because there can be a multiplanar effect when you're irradiating tissues, a little bit of warming is actually not a bad thing, because the difficulty we have is in delivering photons to depth. Okay, and particularly with a non-coherent source like an LED, if you're doing a little bit of superficial warming, here I'm not talking about overheating in the sense of really heating things up, then you're going to get what's known as vasodilatation, and then you're going to get an enriched oxygenated blood supply quite deep into the tissues. You got a sports injury, you know, damage your calf muscle, then that could be something which could then remove some of the lactic acid and some of the pro-inflammatory chemicals that are built up in that damaged area and offer you some relief. And at the same time, the oxygenated blood supply could be beneficial. So being more clinically oriented rather than some purist in regards to trying to activate CCO and the electron transport chain, I can see that there could be multiplanar effects in the sense that a little bit of warmth can actually be really helpful. And so because, as Dr. Hamblin says, there are these checks and balances within your own body, you're very unlikely indeed with an LED to overdo it. So devices like the one you showed, you know, that neoprene pad, or Tom Kerber's SunPower LED palm device. I mean, these are really good devices, you know. I've got one myself, you know. I had backache and it really helps me, you know, and it felt warm. Well, that warmth wasn't anything which was damaging me. It was actually helping, because I got some vasodilatation of my deep back muscles, which really helped relieve some of the spasm that I was experiencing. So is this really a sort of an infrared heat therapy as opposed to PBM? Well, you know, I think here we're sort of splitting hairs, you know, because I'm just looking for therapeutic gain, you know, and in terms of therapeutic benefit, I'm getting a combination of effects. PBM is not the same as heating. Heating is not the same as PBM. PBM and heating go hand in hand. You get a little bit of that no matter what low irradiance you use. And the issue then is a little bit of warming something which can be therapeutically beneficial? The answer is yes. What's too much is when you got a sustained elevated temperature above 45 degrees centigrade, because then, as opposed to vasodilatation, what you get is vasoconstriction. And so the blood vessels close down. You then get containment of that heat, and that contained area, that can get hotter still. And then progressively, it can get to the level in which you're going to get tissue damage, which is what you want to avoid.
And to be clear, you said, I think, above about 43 degrees Celsius is when we're going to really start to feel subjectively the sense of
absolutely
pain.
And that's when the TRPV channels open, TRPV1, and that's when the axons get sensitized, and that's when you start to think, ow, you know, that's getting hot. And so warming things up by 2 degrees centigrade above body temperature of 37.5 is a really useful thing if you want to induce analgesia. Okay. And so if a little bit of warming then triggers off that protective mechanism inside the cell, which then switches off all of the axonal activity, and you see all manner of changes. I mean, it's a fascinating area. I know that Juanita Anders at the Armed Forces University in the States has done a load of work on higher energy systems, looking at managing chronic pain disorders, where with a single application of a higher intensity source, they're seeing some long-lasting relief from pain, because it's like sort of resetting the axon. So you can produce a temporary effect, but the more long-lasting effects, that's PBM. So it isn't just purely heat, but then there are aspects related to how this is working that we don't as yet understand. You know, it's an area of continued research. So short answer is a little bit of heat can be useful.
Okay. Last question to wrap up this important, I think, this very important area of controversy within the PBM field. Using LED devices specifically. Can you give a specific range of, and I think you've mentioned these numbers already in passing, but I just want to sort of be clear about it. Is there a specific range of safe irradiance that we can say more generally, this is going to keep us within the parameters that are not going to be a concern about overheating the tissues or causing damage to the tissues? And then secondary to that, is there an important distinction between photobiostimulation versus photobioinhibition and the irradiances that might correspond to one versus the other?
Well, I mean, for a start, I think more in terms of optic spot size rather than irradiance. Okay, irradiance is the calculation that you're looking to deliver a certain unit of power, which is the rate at which you're delivering energy per square centimeter, and therefore an NIR, an 800 nanometer wavelength device. Then I think my Camlin's quite right. I think keep it below 500 milliwatts per square centimeter, but then I think you're unlikely to find a device that's got that amount of energy of it freely available to buy. When it comes to,
I think there's one that I've seen that's around that.
Well, there you go. I mean, there's always going to be the guy that wants to buy the 5.6 liter rocket.
Yeah.
Whatever. For my money, I'd rather drive safely around town. I don't really want to have a hot rod where I might end up inadvertently overheating things. And so I think in the near infrared, that's a good number to play with. With the shorter wavelengths, with the red wavelengths, because there's more energy associated with that photon, I suggest you put a lid on about 300 milliwatts per square centimeter as a maximum. And then when you start to get down to the shorter wavelengths again, and I'd agree with Mike Hamblin, you want to be below 100 milliwatts. Because otherwise there is an appreciable possibility, because it's such a hot wavelength, that you could start to cause some rapid heating. The key
milliwatts for
is
blue wavelengths. Is that
the key decision is spot size. You want to go for a nice big applicator. Something like that device you showed, that palm device, that's really good. Or one of these neoprene things with a large area. Because small devices like little torches and things, I just published a paper on it today. These can be useful, but you're only dealing with a very small area. And if you're dealing with large volumes of tissues, you will be much more likely to produce the therapeutic effect that you're seeking than if you use a larger device. So I would say go for a bigger optic spot size, but there's an element of ergonomics. If you've got something inside your mouth, you're not going to fit Tom Kerber's palm in there.
Yeah, video. So we do have that solution here. No, you can't fit my palm light inside my mouth, but I can fit one of our optical devices on there, which is an oral probe, which allows you to get into the area that you're trying to treat. And you have the, one split second here. I got to see what I'm doing. Here we go. I just want to show you something. So we do have the oral probe, which allows then that light to come through the tube and have a small spot size, which can easily go to the back of the mouth. Now, we actually have about 200 milliwatts coming out of that, out of the tip here, 200 milliwatts of optical power. So this can do that job. And the other side is you could always treat from external as well, and you just spend a longer time, so it can go inside the mouth through the wall of the cheek and go that way. But you can't fit this in your mouth.
That'd be a fine party trick, And you're going to have to go for something which has maybe got a small glass optic probe and things like this, And see how this all comes into the sort of the considerations of the practicalities of dosimetry, which I'm hoping maybe we'll have the opportunity to talk more about it at length, maybe in one of your future podcasts.
Well, there you go. So I will take your questions. If you want to start putting some questions out there, there's been a couple little ones that we were able to answer along the way. I just want to show you a couple things here. Again, we're coming back to the idea that we have a large area, and that large area, it's not a single spot of light like a lot of the devices, which will have, if I did this with this device, and you see they got a small spot of light. No, no, no. That's with my optical probe. But our light, look at how even the illumination is over that entire surface. That's what helps to get depth, is that whole area is applying a wall of light that's coming in like this, not little tiny points of light like some of the other devices out there. So this is where they'll go in and they'll measure something like this, and they'll go right on top of the lens and they'll measure it and say, look at how much power we have. But the problem is, as soon as you move a half an inch one way or the other, any which way, you end up dropping to nothing. So if I put that against my cheek, all I have is one little spot of light as opposed to that wall of light. So if I put this on here, you'll see I'm going to take this device here and shine it through, and you can see the spots of light that are coming. So all the area, a lot of the area in between might be mixed with another wavelength, but there's so much area in between that has no light energy that's going in. Whereas, like I say, we have that very, very even wall of light that's trademark that I came up with to present. So, yeah, okay. Oh, okay. There's someone asking one more time to just show that very, very even amount of light. There you go. Okay. Shining through just a regular piece of paper, so you can see how nice and even that is. Okay. Can the intraoral probe be beneficial for other areas of the body, nostrils? Yeah, if a person wants to treat, and you could use it for treating in the ear, I would sooner, if there isn't a problem, I would treat the whole area, and you will get everywhere that you need to get to that way. But there are certain locations in the body where this will definitely bring more light into. Definitely bring the light where the light never shines. Okay, let's see. Susan, you mentioned about using the light on your belly or bladder area, and the skin reddened for a while. Yeah, that's very possible. That's not damage to the skin. There's just like extra blood flow. People have noticed that even treating on a certain area, that area will remain very warm for very much warmer than the other area around it, because it just increases the blood flow so much. Kim is mentioning about the light seems so bright. So black dog hair actually blocks some of the light when it's not touching the skin. That's correct. It does absorb some of that light, and we do have, if a pet has extremely heavy fur, you may want to look at one of our other devices that we have now just recently made. We haven't got it up on the web yet, but it allows us to basically work your way into through the fur. It's got like 8 probes on it to get in deeper. Okay. I'll just take a moment here. I want to mention we do have our helmet as well. We've had some really, really neat success with this device. This has it's basically like 10 of the palm lights. Each one of these is basically like one of the palm lights. And with this, we have quite a bit of energy coming out of this. For those that understand, this is 25 optical watts. And as a matter of fact, so because of that, going into the entire skull very evenly. And with 25 watts per coming in, that's 25 joules per second so, and if you did a well, yeah, so in 1 minute you're actually 60 times that. By the way, this is a real human skull, this one here, where you can see the suture marks on it. Pretty neat how that is on the skull. But look at how light can go through. So I'm just putting the palm light in the back of this, and I turn it on. Look at how that light goes right through the skull. I'll turn it off again. And you can see another way to show that is going the other way around. And you can see as I move the palm light around, you can see the light going right through. So for those that were uncertain if light therapy could get through the skull, even if you have a thick head like I have, it'll get through. So yes, it's pretty amazing what this can do. We've been able to see people with the helmet. It has the two wavelengths as well. It has the 660 nanometer and it has the 810 nanometer. You can basically see the little dots there, but you feel incredibly quite a nice warm sensation when you put that on the head. But we have been able to, we know that research is showing out there that this is something that can help with dementia, Alzheimer's, strokes, concussions, brain fog, and a whole host of depression. There was a study, and that study is out there that shows that we had on our helmet. It was just presented. We'll be getting a copy of that to pop up, a new copy of just a very, very recent presentation. But we do have it on our website. Go to PBM, go through the research tab and down to PBM 2024, and you can find the different applications of the helmet, concussion, and also my presentation on light LEDs versus lasers, as well as other types of other applications. In this case, there was a study that was presented from Shepherd's University in West Virginia that used my helmet for people with opiate addiction and depression. And they were able to go through the study. And the group that got the light treatment, they did start off with 50 people. 25 of the people had got the light treatment. 25 did not. The 25 that did, in the end, boiled down to 17 people, and that was because this was people that were dealing with the courts, and some of them were incarcerated, so our total number dropped to 17. But those 17 people with 2 months of treatment, that's twice a week of only 3 minutes each time. So 6 minutes a week of light treatment significantly improved their lowered their depression, lowered their cravings for opiates, increased their outlook, improved their outlook in life. And it's a beautiful study. And they're going to do a much larger study out there. So it's pretty neat that that's happening. So I've got some other questions coming out. Could you review how to use the oral probe? So basically with the oral probe, there's two holes in here. There's a 660 nanometer hole, which is the outer circle, and the inner one is the 810 or the 1050. And what a person does is they just put the probe into the unit, whichever wavelength they choose, and then they place this into the unit like this, and they line it up so that the LED, and it's going to be hard to see, is right in the center. There you can see by my thumb there, the open hole, there's a LED right in the center. It's a hard angle to show, but you just push that into place, and now, I put the little cap on the end. This is a protective cap, but you can see the light coming out of that little tiny end there because just I lined it up. And if a person was to use the other wavelength, they push it in the other hole. So that's how it works. This is timely. This is by Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your question. Is this timely? I just had a wisdom tooth removal. How soon could I use one of these oral probes? Okay, it's on our website. And how soon could you? Immediately. As a matter of fact, if you've got our device, use the device for now, because you can't focus right on it. Just use the two wavelengths. And my suggestion would be, because you're going through the tissue of your cheek and then getting to the target area, you might want to do as much as 3, 4, even maybe 5 minutes of the red. The red might be a little bit on the warm side, and then switch to the near infrared and do another 3, 4, 5 minutes. If you're trying to get rid of the pain, if there's pain associated with it, you can even treat longer and do that 2 or 3 times a day, and you'll help heal that open wound. That's really what it is now that you had it removed. What about a metal or back brace or metal in your body? No problems with other types of material inside the body, because it does cool the couple things is, once the light goes through, I'll use my friend Alfred here. Once the light goes through the first layer of skin, or in this case, the skull, the light is reduced. The blood flow will take the heat away in the upper layers of the skin. So there's no heat buildup on metal parts. So if you have screws, if you have plates, or you have anything, it's not a problem. It won't affect electrical either. So if you have electrical stuff going on, it's not going to harm that. Is it safe to use if one suspects blood clots? You can always check with your doctor, but I'm not a doctor, by the way. I'm just sharing with you what other people have found. Is they've seen that the pain associated with blood clots, because it works on a cellular basis, it's not going to release the clot to travel. It's just going to help the body to break down that clot cell by cell. So it's a beautiful thing. Okay. Okay. I'm just looking at our time. By the way, anybody hanging in to this point, even a few minutes ago, still has their ballot entered. We're not cutting it short. Okay. So Charlie is asking, how deep into the inner ear might the okay, sorry, we're moving things around here. Okay. Might the palm unit penetrate? Well, we're actually reaching into the brain with this, so it's not a problem to reach through the ear canal and get into the area with the nerves and everything. And we've had people that have told me about their situation with tinnitus or tinnitus, however you pronounce it, and they have treated themselves with 1 minute red, the bright red, and 3 minutes of the near infrared. And they've had success in reducing that. Now, that's not everybody. I wish I could promise everybody who gets one of our lights is going to have improvement for their tinnitus. But it can, I'm aware of 9 people out of 12. Now, I haven't changed this number because nobody else has come forward since the last time I had taken numbers, but 9 people out of 12 significantly had an improvement in their situation. Yeah, okay. Bob mentioned that in his case, he actually feels that he feels the hair getting hot. It can. It depends on the airflow, darkness and it will absorb some of the light. That's correct. Okay. So we've had people use this for eye health, wellness for the eyes, and with some different, really cool improvements. But if one would close their eyelids, it's absolutely must they close their eyelids and do 1 minute of the red and 1 minute of the near infrared. they will, there's a good possibility it could help their situation. Now, some would wonder, well, isn't that rather bright on the eye? Well, as a matter of fact, the output power of our devices are somewhere between 100 to 180 milliwatts per square centimeter. And the sun puts out 100 milliwatts per square centimeter. So yes, we are a little more powerful, but how many people lay out on the beach with their eyes closed for for long periods of time, 30 minutes, 60 minutes? We're talking about 1 minute of each. So no, it's not. As long as you have your eyelids closed, it's very safe because the eyelid diffuses the light and also reduces it a bit. And so you have a very even illumination throughout the eye. I think, okay. Okay, John. So Pastor John, this is a testimony. He just so testimony. One treatment last Friday, off crutches next day, standing preaching on Sunday. First time in 2.5 months. Hey, fantastic, John. Good to hear. I also have another doctor friend who she routinely rolls her ankle, and she said that she would be on crutches for weeks, and could not. Every time she did it, it was pretty much standard. And when she got the light, she said she immediately treated with her palm light around the area. And the next day, she was already starting to be able to put pressure on her foot and even get off the crutches totally, very, very quickly. So all different kinds of injuries that can speed up that healing. So anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please tell everyone that you can that we have this podcast. Since this type of technology can help so many different kinds of conditions, you never know who you might help by sharing with them about our light. Now, next webinar will be March 25th, next Tuesday. Please join us. And so anyways, we just want to wish you all of God's richest blessings in this coming week. And please share with others to join us. And also, we do have a YouTube channel. If you look at SunPowerLED, please subscribe. And if you like them, click the like button. We love you to join us at the SunPower LED YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and bye for now.